South America, from Syria to Britain, how it transformed the way we think about God and about ourselves. How it brought the promise of salvation to countless people and death and destruction to countless more. Whether we are believers or we are not, this global religion continues to exert the profoundest influence on the world in which we live.
This film is the story of the origins and consequences of Christian belief. The bare facts are that Christianity originated in devout Judaism, and yet for Jews, Christianity has, all things considered, been a calamity.
Here in this central square, there was a big gallows to hang people. It was a terrorism.
To hang Jews?
Yeah, to hang Jews.
The Jews very much for Christians represent that element of original sin.
I still remember, I was 7 years old, they actually called me the Christ killer.
To understand Christianity's Jewish origins, we first need to understand the man whose life inspired it. He was not a Christian. Christianity could not grow out of Christianity. Jesus was, and not incidentally, but through and through, a Jew. I am a convinced Jew, but not a practicing one. I'm a Jew of the head and of the heart. The Judaism in which I grew up was not so much liberal or orthodox as befuddled. We were proud of being Jewish, but we weren't always certain what being Jewish meant. Thus, we would not dream of having bacon in the house, but my father was perfectly happy to dress up as Father Christmas every year and deliver us presents. But we had no tree, and we feared the cross as any vampire might. The crucifix encapsulated all our troubles. Because we Jews had killed Christ, as Christians believed, we were an outcast people. And because we'd been made outcast in Christ's name, we were alarmed by every aspect of Christianity. No matter that what the first Christians said, they said as Jews to Jews. So is Judaism Christianity's guilty secret? And does that guilt explain the abhorrence of Jews sewn into the garments of the Christian faith? This 2,000-year history of Christianity begins with the idea of a Messiah. The word Messiah does not mean God or even Son of God. A Messiah prepares the way for God. In Jesus' day, the Jewish people lived under Roman occupation, in a frenzy of expectation for a Messiah who would liberate their country and prepare them for the coming of the Lord.
It's always amazing to me how many Jews think Messiah is not a Jewish concept. They think it's a purely Christian concept. The reality is it began with the Jewish people, as we'll see. Christianity took the concept and changed it dramatically.
The Old Testament makes frequent promise of a Messiah or Redeemer of the Jewish nation. Part prophet, part soldier, he would be of the royal line of David, whose birthplace was Bethlehem. In order for Jesus to fulfill these messianic prophecies, he too had to be born here.
For first-century Jews, Bethlehem would be considered a royal town. This had been the birthplace of David, and in the prophecy of Micah, it was foretold that a successor to David, one of his descendants way down the line, hundreds of years later, would be born there. And so, according to many scholars, Christians simply invented Bethlehem because they thought of Jesus as the Messiah. No, I don't believe that.
The sequence of events, or at least one sequence of events, is familiar to everybody, Christian or not. Mary and Joseph travelling from Nazareth to pay their Roman taxes. No room at the inn. Baby Jesus born in a manger. 3 wise men bearing gifts. How much is history and how much is belief wanting to be history? Scholars and theologians cannot agree. But even the 2 gospel writers who agree that Jesus was born in Bethlehem disagree over the circumstances of the nativity. Even those 2 that mention it are at pains to get Jesus to Bethlehem somehow.
Not get him to Bethlehem, because for Matthew, Jesus is born in Bethlehem because that is the residence of his parents. They have a house, according to the text. They end up in Nazareth as refugees. Luke made a mistake. Jesus of Nazareth? But then how come he was born in Bethlehem? So he has to invent the census to get him to Bethlehem.
But how can you know it was Luke that made the mistake and not Matthew that made the mistake?
Because the census is nonsense. The census, we're told, was for the Roman Empire. This wasn't part of the Roman Empire. This was an independent Jewish kingdom. It's a complete nonsense. But Luke had to try and find a motive why a heavily pregnant woman would travel the length of the country. He made a guess and he got it wrong.
Silent night, holy night.
And the guessing goes on. Christians flock to the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, said to be built over the site of the manger in which Jesus was born.
I think Bethlehem was an embarrassment to the early Christians because there was a messianic prophecy centered on Bethlehem, the prophecy of Micah, which promised a warrior king. And Jesus was anything but. He spent his time with tax collectors and sinners. He didn't fulfill the messianic prophecy of Bethlehem.
And there, for Jews, is the nub of it. How could Jesus be the Messiah if he fulfilled none of the Old Testament prophecies?
What's the point? This is a crucial point to understand. You don't get the title until you finish the job. Okay? This, by the way, is the #1 issue that Judaism would have with Jesus and Christianity. What's the issue? Jesus didn't fulfill this description here. How does Christianity theologically sidestep the issue? Second coming. He'll come again in the future, and then the job will be done.
Jesus did not bring about God's kingdom here on earth. Later Christians turned his material failure into spiritual success. Salvation, they said, would happen in another world. But for Jews, the Messiah they had long awaited was of this world, a real man in the royal line of David who would free them from Roman occupation, or at least make them fit to be free from Roman occupation by bringing in an age of truth and justice and holiness. Since none of this had happened, Jesus could not have been the Messiah. To Jews for whom the world remains unredeemed, the true Messiah is still to come. So if Jesus the Jew wasn't the Messiah, what was he?
I think the most shocking thing I could say to you is the apostles, all 12 apostles, Jesus himself, were not baptized as Christians.